Yes, we've seen 162,563 eviction filings since the start of the pandemic. Over 3,500 of those were filed just the week before last. There's been a steady increase in eviction filings over the course of the summer and into the fall. We're still well below normal eviction filing levels, however. Since the start of the pandemic, only about a third as many eviction cases have been filed as would be filed in a normal year. We've worked on some new analysis extrapolating across the country, and we're estimating that over 1.5 million eviction cases have been avoided this year. Of course, the kind of flip side interpretation there is that many of those eviction filings could get pushed into 2021. There's reason to be concerned about what happens when eviction moratoria start lifting. One of the reasons that we're pleased about the extension of the current eviction moratorium to the end of January is that we avoid a sort of 20-day gap between the end of this year and the start of the Biden-Harris administration. I think regardless, though, unless sufficient rental assistance programs are in place, we have every reason to expect that we'll be facing down a large number of eviction filings once the federal moratorium does lift. The scale of the problem also becomes clear when we look at the amounts that landlords are claiming in eviction cases. So prior to the pandemic, the typical renter who's facing eviction in Houston was being filed against for just over $1,000. It's about a month's rent in Harris County. That number is now at $2,000. So more cases are being filed, and more of them are for larger amounts of money. Whenever these moratoria lift, there are going to be a lot of renters out there who have a lot of unpaid rent, and we need that federal rental assistance program, at least the $25 billion that came out of this bill that was passed yesterday, to fend off just a huge number of evictions. I want to finish with one last point that I think is pretty critical in any reporting on or analysis of eviction. Black Americans bear the brunt of the eviction crisis. Across all eviction tracker system sites, they make up about 21% of all renters, yet they receive over 35% of all eviction filings. That was true prior to the pandemic, which is the bar in sort of teal here, and it's true today. It's what we're seeing since March 15th in the bar in dark blue. The history of housing in this country is a long story of dispossession and systematic racialized exclusion. We continue to see that playing out today in rental housing and the risk of displacement through eviction. I think it's critically important that we understand that there was an eviction crisis in this country well before the pandemic started. In a typical year, about 3.7 million eviction cases are filed across the US. So by context, at the worst of the Great Recession, when there was this foreclosure crisis, there were 2.8 million foreclosure starts. So the level of displacement that we see through eviction every year in a good year is much greater than the level of displacement that we were seeing during the Great Recession. It's just that it affects this population of renters who are generally the focus of much less policy intervention or concern. I think in terms of explaining the broad trends that lead us to this point, you look at wages being basically stagnant, especially for low-skilled workers over the last 20 years, while at the same time, rents have increased dramatically. So there are an ever larger share of renters who are burdened by housing costs and who really haven't seen any increase in their pay in decades. I think a lot will rest on what the Biden administration does probably on January 20th with the potential of extending the federal eviction moratorium. But the stimulus agreement that was settled, the $25 billion there is a significant down payment on rental debt. And there are some benefits in how that was structured. Representative Liu made mention of this, but the ability to pay renters directly is a very important step that will allow these programs to distribute funds more effectively and to potentially sidestep landlords who don't want to participate in these programs because they feel that it might limit their ability to evict tenants down the road. So low range estimates of rental debt that have accrued during the pandemic suggests that, like, at a minimum, $30 billion is probably necessary. $25 billion takes us a good way there, but it's almost certainly not enough. And there are problems in distributing those funds. Over the course of the last 8 months, a lot of states and counties have figured out how to distribute that money more effectively, by using CARES Act funds. And we're going to see this current batch of money is going to be distributed through the same channels. So some of the kinks in these programs have been worked out, but there are absolutely still problems in actually getting this money out and making rent paid.